Welcome to the next video on this course in sustainability leadership. This one is on the political opportunities. Let's jump right in. And I want to start off by saying the opportunities that I'm going to describe here, they apply worldwide, but to get to the general through the specific, I'm going to focus on the US. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that the US impacts the environment the most. There might be other countries with higher per capita, but the combination of per capita and overall impact, I think the US is the biggest. We're setting a lot of trends in directions I don't like. Many constitutions derive from the US Constitution. So talking about the US Constitution applies to them. And I know America best, and I'm going to act on these opportunities here. By all means, apply them where you are. I believe that the more specific I am about what I'm doing here, the more helpful that will be elsewhere. I believe that this political action, the stuff that I'm talking about here, will unite across political divides. Sustainability will unite as much as the great historical cases, especially World War II, but most of all, abolitionism. For the United States, this is the greatest conflict in U.S. history. Something like 1 million were killed in the Civil War. Millions were enslaved. Hundreds of thousands were killed defending slavery. They were defending slavery, something that we look back from today and say, how could that be? Yet today, nearly all political traditions trace their lineage to include Lincoln, Douglas, Tubman, and so on. Left, right, center, old, young, rich, poor, white, black, everyone says they're one of us. But few of us would have been abolitionists. I don't care your skin color or whatever. If you were born in 1850 Alabama, you would grow up like a white slave owning family. You'd probably not have been abolitionist. And many of our behavioral ancestors were on the other side too. So you might trace your lineage, if you're left, right, center, or whatever, to Lincoln, probably also to the people that opposed Lincoln. Many today, if transported to be born in 1800 as a plantation owner in the South, they would say the 1800s equivalents of the rationalizations and justifications of the first video, the actual problem. So they would say some version of what I do doesn't matter. Individual action doesn't matter. I care, but I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm working hard. I'm already doing all I can. These things that we say today, people back then said it. I'll give some examples later of actual things that they said that you would say, how could they say that? And yet they did. And that means probably, it's tough to look inside, but they were human just like us. But we will learn from history to avoid their mistakes. Future generations will see us with the clarity that we see plantation owners, slaveholders, and buyers of slave-produced goods. Future generations will be as horrified by our choices as we are of the slaveholders' choices. Living more sustainably means that I'm likely living by the values of those claiming to trace their lineages to abolitionism more than they are. What I mean by that? I'm living more conservative than conservatives, more liberal than liberals, more libertarian than libertarians, and you will too after you read the book and take the workshop. And when you do, when you live by their values more than they do, they will look up to you, and therein lie the political opportunities. Let me give a brief history of sustainability. A political history of sustainability. Scientists discovered our environmental problems or symptoms as I describe what's happening in the environment, and they proposed solutions. Now, this is going back over half a century and longer. Academia now, but even then skewed liberal, so did their proposals. Even if they didn't intend to advance their politics, even if they didn't think of themselves as political, they just proposed what made sense to them. And these were often government-based solutions. Conservatives saw their proposals as advancing liberal causes, all the more since generally they weren't practicing what their proposals proposed. So conservatives reacted against the proposals, but didn't look at the situation, the environmental situation, from their own core values and principles. We will in this video. So liberals considered themselves right, and they considered the others deniers. They're people who cared about profit more than people or wildlife, or their free markets were just trashing everything. Conservatives and libertarians considered liberals self-righteous, anti-human, attacking freedom and liberty, and ignorantly, they meant well, but they didn't realize that they were descending into Stalinism or Maoism, things like that, authoritarianism. So all different parties claimed themselves attacked, and they attacked others with the same old arguments. What I mean is they would advance the causes they'd been advancing long before sustainability was the issue, implying that they were just using sustainability or the environmental situation to advance what they were already advancing. As far as I could tell, none of them considered sustainability possible or desirable. They weren't practicing it. They would pay lip service, but they thought that it would make their lives worse. That's why they didn't stop flying. That's why they kept doing what they were doing. And so they didn't act. Each promotes pie in the sky solutions. I put solutions in quotes because on the left, they're like, green energy and renewables. But they're not green energy, and they're not green. They're not renewable. I mean, the wind is renewable, but the windmills are not. The solar panels are not. And they claim that the others are blocking them. We would be achieving what we were trying to do, but the other ones, they're the problem. So they take pot shots at the others, and they rally their own base. All the different parties, by saying they're the ones causing the problem, they mutually benefit from what I see as them dancing together. They're not acting, they're claiming the others are the problem, and they're rallying their bases. And it's a very stable system, and it works well because they all don't think it's really going to work. Now, here's what's not the political opportunity. What I'm not going to do, what I see as more of that dance, is continuing that dance. Passing laws coercing people to act contrary to their interests, that's not effective politics. That's prohibition. It didn't work. I'm not proposing anything like that. Taking pot shots at the other side, rallying your base, that's not it. All sides propose their old solutions that contributed to the actual problem. Remember the problem. The symptoms are what we read about in the paper. The problem is that we're promoting pollution, depletion, things that pollute and deplete, that destroy life, liberty, and property. So they are augmenting and accelerating our results. That dance augments and accelerates our results. And most associate sustainability with liberals and the left. So I'm going to start this political opportunity, talking about the political opportunities. I'll start with conservatives and libertarians. So the conservative and libertarian opportunities. Again, this brief history. Many proposals for government, if this is from the conservative perspective, somewhat, many proposals for government interventions resembled New Deal programs, hence eventually the Green New Deal. But those programs' unintended side effects often dwarfed the intended ones and couldn't be stopped. So a couple of big examples I talked about before in one of the earlier videos. The Dust Bowl was in many ways advanced by well-meaning government interventions to distribute land and privatize land throughout the Midwest. And it ended up, they thought they were getting lots of giant wheat yields, helping win World War I with all the wheat that came out of it. And they were extracting the topsoil, which all blew away in the Dust Bowls. And there's much more to it than that. I'm just covering the surface. Cadillac Desert, the disappearing water of the American West, began with dams and things that were supposed to, they were these New Deal projects and preceding the New Deal, but accelerated there. And it looked really great. And then we can't stop it. And now the waste wars, this book just came out this year, 2025, and it talks about legislation in the US and global treaties that were supposed to stop pollution and toxins going out the environment, and it accelerated these things. People meant well. So the conservatives and libertarians heard big government proposals and thought, we've heard that before. They sound like attempts to take over government. Or best, naive plans that, if successful, would descend into Maoism, Stalinism, and if you've read Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. It looked like that. It looked like, because they were generally advancing their political causes, not just environmental. And this view was augmented by liberals not doing what they told others to. So if you follow the money, it showed people making, from the conservative perspective, it showed people making money and gaining power. So it looked like a craven attempt for grasp for power. But few conservatives and libertarians looked at their environmental situation from their own first principles, and that's what we're going to do. Adam Smith, I'm going to repeat what I said before. He saw that in 1776, little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and tolerable administration of justice. All governments which thwart this become oppressive and tyrannical. So what does he mean by justice? It's the opposite of being extorted by force. The virtue of justice is the violation of justice is injury. So as I see it, protection from extortion from force, that is, protection from coercion, is justice. And I think that and also John Locke, this is about a century before, he talked about how does something become property. So if there's something out in nature, say an apple on a tree that's not on anyone's land, At some point, it's part of nature. And at some point, if you eat it, it becomes you. It becomes your property. How? So he would say that if you improve it, and you read 2 treatises in government if you want to get most of that. But there's this one thing he says, that if you take from nature, you cannot have, no man but he can have a right to what is one's joined to, at least where there's enough and as good left in common for others. You don't take the last one. Now, this is not new to Europeans. Indigenous all over there have known this and said this, so it's not just an Enlightenment new idea. But his stewardship clause on the legitimate acquisition of property from nature made stewardship fundamental to government's legitimacy and property rights. Thomas Jefferson, he said it differently. A question of such consequences, the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. The dead have neither powers nor rights over it. What he meant by that, in plain language, is the living have a right only to what they can fairly use during their own lives. To take more than that that they could repay during their own lives would be to rob future generations of resources. This word usufruct he uses. So he was saying, you can't take from nature, you can't take the last one. You have to leave enough for others. If he could, he might, during his lifetime, eat up the usufruct of the lands for several generations to come. And in this one, stewardship must hold for all, not just for some. So this is what can be property and what can't be property. Again, am I citing just a bunch of dead white men? No, Indian nations and in the United States, they contributed to the U.S. Constitution, and I consider this enlightened indigenous. Not to leave it better than you found it, live and let live. This is not enlightenment only. Enlightenment, yes, and indigenous. I mean, this is basic human stuff. I believe that every human culture we've ever come across has had some version of do unto others as you would have them do unto you in various different language. Sometimes it's reciprocity and things like that. So you can look up the quote. Also considering energy, 1776 was the first installation of Watt's steam engine. That means that virtually no coal was burned in all of human history by the writing of the Wealth of Nations, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution. So all this bright future that they envisioned, that we are living in the wake of, did not require fossil fuels. The highest degree of opulence, the pursuit of happiness, a more perfect union, blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, no fossil fuels, no nuclear, no energy source beyond plants, wind, and water. And these weren't like space age windmills. I'm talking about windmills and water mills from that period. For freedom and liberty, we do need to protect life, liberty, and property. That's justice, or as Smith put it, which pollution and depletion destroy. So if we allow pollution and depletion, we're not protecting life, liberty, and property. Absent that protection, tomorrow would look worse than today. We would lose a reason to work for a brighter future and revert to protecting ourselves and our tribes. That's what happens if we don't protect life, liberty, and property. It doesn't make for a better world. In Locke's view, that would make a government that doesn't protect life, liberty, and property illegitimate. So let's go to Edmund Burke, often called the father of conservatism. And this is just after the French Revolution. He wrote on respecting tradition instead of jettisoning values like stewardship and warning of the dangers without it. One of the first and most leading principles for laws is to avoid that people, unmindful of what they have received from their ancestors or what is due to their posterity, should act as if they were their entire masters. And you end up destroying at their pleasure the whole original fabric of society, hazarding to leave to those who come a ruin instead of habitation. So he was into the father of conservatism. Makes sense that he would be conservative. We have to leave enough in common for others. I expect future generations will see humanity's forays into unsustainability as violating long-established tradition. And actually, I expect current generations are already seeing it that way. Frederick Bastiat, writing after the French Revolution, if the law takes from some persons which belongs to them and gives to others what does not belong to them, is not merely an iniquity, it is a fertile source of iniquities, for it invites reprisals. And if you not take care, exceptional case will extend, multiply, and become systematic. This is what was happening with the stuff at the Dust Bowl. People took what didn't belong to them. It was in nature, and they gave it to some. And it was not just an iniquity; it was a fertile source of iniquity. The people treated it like it was their own. The government said it was yours, and then came the Dust Bowl. Now we're doing it again with the aquifers. We're the Ogallala aquifer is providing the water but we're depleting it. He lamented that all the consequences of such a perversion would require volumes to describe, but one of the main ones is that the people who get it feel entitled. So people who are also fossil fuels, there's stuff in the ground and it's going to the private property of some people. Now you say, oh, it's helping the market. Well, it's polluting too. No doubt the party benefiting will explain loudly. He will assert his acquired rights. He will say the state is bound to protect and encourage his industry. Sound familiar? He will plead that it is a good thing for the state to be enriched, and it will spend the more, and thus shower down salaries upon the poor workmen. Sound familiar? Isn't that what we're saying about these industries? Take care not to listen to the sophistry, Bastiat said, for it is just by the systematizing of these arguments that legal plunder becomes systematized. Plunder. We are plundering the world. Plunder made legal. Is plunder too strong a word? He himself regretted that there is something offensive in the word, but he sought in vain for another. He said, this is the best and only appropriate word. We're plundering. When we take from the commons or one group and give it to another, that's plunder. And just because you make it legal doesn't mean it doesn't lead people to feel entitled and want to do it more and more and more and more. Speaking of doing more and more and more. All right, Friedrich Hayek in Road to Serfdom, I want to talk about, I just want to mention his views on, the harmful effects of deforestation or the smoke of factories cannot be confined to the owner of the property in question. These tasks provide a wide and unquestioned field for state activity. So a lot of people think of him as very minimal state stuff, but deforestation, smoke, pollution into the atmosphere, into the water. But more to the point here, once wide course of powers are given to governmental agencies for particular purposes, such powers cannot be effectively controlled by democratic assemblies. So once the state gives permissions for people to pollute and deplete, which is to say to destroy life, living property, it's very difficult to rein that back in again, maybe impossible. We may enjoy the perks that polluting and polluting enable, but if we wish to preserve a free society, if we want freedom, if we want liberty, it is essential that we recognize that the desirability of a particular object is not sufficient justification for use of coercion. Okay, you like to fly, you like to jump into this metal tube and a few hours later end up in the other side of the world. Sure, you like it, but that's coercion. You're destroying life, liberty, and property of people who, no one wants to be born with a birth defect. No one consents to being made a refugee. And that's what happens when we pollute, when we deplete. So yeah, you like those things, but do you like freedom and liberty? Because you get one or the other, but not both. Milton Friedman, I'm not in favor of no government. You do need a government. There's no other institution, in my opinion, that can provide us with the protection of our life and liberty. You want liberty? You want freedom? Government has that role. The key insight of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is misleadingly simple. If an exchange between two parties is voluntary, it will not take place and both believe they'll benefit from it. I like that. Most economic fallacies derive from neglect of this simple insight. Yes, no one chooses to be born with a birth defect, to inhale carcinogens, or to have plastics in their veins and brains. And we have these. You have plastic in your veins and your brains. You didn't consent to that. That is not what Adam Smith, that's not voluntary. That is coercion. That's someone saying, I'm going to stick something in the environment and you got to deal with it. You don't want to deal with it? Tough luck. You got it. You have to. That's coercion. That's not a free market. Regarding growth, you remember this one from before. We have no desperate need to grow. We have a desperate desire to grow. Those are different. The growth is what we want it to be. I want people to be free to pursue their own objective. We don't have to grow when growing doesn't make our lives better. If polluting less, therefore more liberty and freedom, if we like more liberty and freedom, and for that matter, if that makes our own personal lives better in the moment, we don't have to grow. He also said there's a real function for government in respect to pollution, to set the conditions and in particular define property rights, just like Locke did, John Locke, to make sure that the costs are borne by the parties responsible. About pollution, there's a case for government to do something about it, because there's always a case for government to some extent when what two people do affects a third party. So he says, airbags in the car, that's my business. But emissions control, emissions that go out, there's a case for that. So very minimal government guy, but that's how you get a free market, is you don't have coercion. Russell Kirk, in The Conservative Mind, now jumping to more conservative people. If men are discharged of reverence for ancient usage, if they're not living conservatively, they will treat this world almost certainly as if it were their private property to be consumed for sensual gratification, and thus will destroy in their lust for enjoyment of the property of future generations. This is just like Jefferson with the usufruct of their own contemporaries, and indeed their very own capital. The modern spectacle of vanished forests, eroded lands, wasted petroleum, and ruthless mining, national debts recklessly increased until they are repudiated, That's what acting without veneration does. Russell Kirk saw this. Very conservative view. Barry Goldwater, conscience of a conservative, very conservative. I'm a great believer in the free competitive enterprise system and all that it entails. I'm an even stronger believer in the right of our people to live in a clean and pollution-free environment. Pollution-free. When pollution is found, it should be halted at the source, even if this requires stringent government action against important segments of our national economy. Barry Goldwater. Our job is to prevent that lush orb known as Earth from turning into a bleak and barren, dirty brown planet. The administration, a different administration, he was talking about someone else, is absolutely correct in cracking down on companies and corporations and municipalities that continue to pollute the nation's air and water. You want to be extreme. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And that's this, what he was saying. Stringent government action. William F. Buckley Jr., fairly conservative guy. On government regulating pollution, here is a legitimate concern of government, a classic example of the kind of thing that government should do, according to Lincoln's test, because people can't do it as well or better themselves. On regulating pollution. Ronald Reagan, fairly conservative guy, don't you think? I'm proud of having been one of the first to recognize that states and the federal government have a duty to protect the natural resources from the damaging effects of pollution. A house divided against itself cannot stand. This is Lincoln. I believe that this government cannot endure it permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. This is from his great House divided speech. I do not expect the House to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. That was in his time, freedom or slavery. A constitution that protects life, liberty, and property cannot also allow slavery. Slavery must expand beyond any border. That's why they had plans across the continent beyond, the slave states wanted to go down into Central America and South America. The Fugitive Slave Act, they went, because they can't stop slaves from escaping to other states that are free states. So they went into free states, talk about states' rights. They had to go into other states that were free states and impose their rules on other states. And the Dred Scott decision, saying that blacks were never envisioned to be citizens, that's what happens when you try to a house divided against itself. Likewise, a constitution that protects life, liberty, and property cannot also allow pollution or depletion. They also expand beyond any border, as I just quoted the conservative saw. That's why there are always plans to expand across the globe and beyond. And all this regulatory capture, also called corruption, by fossil fuel and oil companies of the government. A nation can allow slavery or it can protect freedom, not both. Likewise, a nation can allow polluting and depleting, or it can protect freedom, not both. When you aren't enjoying the perks from slavery or the perks from pollution and depletion, it's obvious that freedom and liberty require ending them. We don't live our Constitution does not slavery. There's that exception, but generally the 13th Amendment, we don't allow slavery, and we think it's bad. We think it's wrong. We prefer freedom and liberty, even though you might not be enslaved yourself. You don't want others to be enslaved either. Future generations, it'll be clear that all this stuff, all these perks that we get that require polluting, they deprive others of life, liberty, and property. That's not freedom. That's not liberty. It's obvious when you're not the one flying around. When you're not the one ordering takeout. It's obvious. When you benefit from slavery, you come up with rationalizations and justifications like, this is a quote from the Richmond Enquirer: "Freedom is not possible without slavery." This is like opposites, but that's what happens when you own slaves and you want to sleep at night. You got to tell yourself these things. John Calhoun on the Senate floor said the relation now existing in slaveholding states between the two races is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good. Slavery has done more to elevate a degraded race on the scale of humanity, to tame the savage, to civilize the barbarous. He's saying that slavery is good. Better than all the missionaries and philanthropy and religion have ever sent forth. That's William Harper, representative from South Carolina. When you benefit from pollution and depletion, you come up with similar rationalizations and justifications, like what I do doesn't matter, individual action doesn't matter, I care, I'm doing all I can. All those pages from the actual problem video, that's how, see, we don't pollute and deplete because of those beliefs. We don't think what I do doesn't matter, therefore I'm going to act and pollute and do these things that pollute. We do these things that pollute, and then we say, oh, what I do doesn't matter. We believe those things because we pollute and deplete and we want to sleep at night. Those are after, culture. It's very difficult to go against culture. And so we go along to get along. And then we say, well, what I do doesn't matter. There's this huge moral hazard. Our governments around the world permit the destruction of life, liberty, and property. Exactly the opposite of one of the roles nearly all agree on for government to protect life, liberty, and property. And I want to say permit, not just allow, permit in the sense of allow, issue permits so that the government makes revenue, and the bureaucrats issuing those permits, they gain power and often money because of it. The U.S. Civil War may look small compared to the potential collapse credibly predicted for our near future. Slaveholders couldn't imagine life without slavery. They imagined ending slavery would end civilization and ruin them. Does that sound familiar? Most of us can't imagine life without polluting and depleting. How many times have people told me, what, you want to return to the Stone Age? You want civilization to collapse? There was civilization before the steam engine. Alex Epstein wrote in The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel, primitive peoples prayed so fervently to climate gods because they were almost totally at the mercy of the naturally volatile, dangerous climate system. We say, we can't possibly live without civilization. It's impossible. And yet, humans survived for 250,000 years, populating 6 continents with almost no tools or technology. We were not at the mercy of a naturally volatile, dangerous climate system. It's abundant and nurturing. That's what we tell ourselves now. That's our beliefs now. That belief is like these beliefs. When you're not in it, you see it. When you're in it, you don't see it. Plantation owners chose slavery, but the nation chose freedom. Many Americans embraced slavery to the point of sacrificing their lives to maintain it. They fought in the wars. They sent their sons and brothers off to war. The nation chose freedom and liberty. The 13th Amendment unites us on what was once our most divisive issue. I'm not aware of anyone that's campaigning based on repealing the 13th Amendment. I don't think they'd win an election. Maybe there's a few people out there who say we should restore slavery. I've never heard it said in public. And speaking of amendments, amendments are different than regulation. I had several, if you go on my podcast, I have several constitutional scholars. They're lawyers and academics. And I didn't realize lawyers don't actually, the legislation that follows, the Constitution is different than the law. It's where the law comes from. And here's one big illustration of it from Ayn Rand. In Atlas Shrugged, not a big fan of big government. And the closing paragraphs after, I read this book, when all the people who had went off to let society fall apart without them, when they came back, a closing paragraph, the victors coming back, one of them, Judge Narragansett, he sat at a table and the light of his lamp fell on a copy of an ancient document, which is the Constitution. He had marked and crossed out the contradictions in its statements, the house divided cannot stand, and that had once been the cause of its destruction. He was adding a new clause to its pages. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of production and trade. Okay, so she's proposing an amendment to amend the Constitution. She doesn't want to get rid of the Constitution. She doesn't want no government. She wants a government, and she wants an amendment to it. That's not big government. That's restricting government. All right, hold that thought of all those conservative thoughts and libertarian thoughts. And then let's look at the liberal opportunities. When I started working on sustainability, I asked myself, can we change? And when I realized the problem is our culture and we have to change it, I asked myself, can we change global culture and time? And I looked around, were there examples of it? Because if we couldn't, I'd see no point in trying. Just give up. But I found an answer in abolitionism. Within a couple human lifetimes, humans made an institution that was legal and considered normal everywhere. Within a couple human lifetimes, it was made illegal everywhere. I mean, slaves wanted to be free, but ending the institution was a whole other story. So abolitionism, slavery, racism, and anti-racism. There's a big challenge for me. Talking about abolitionism meant talking about slavery, which meant talking about race. And around when I started writing about this, George Floyd was killed. And people told me to my face, shut up and listen. Your voice has been heard already. We don't need to hear it anymore. And that made it very difficult to write stuff in my book. So I went into a deep historical dive. And I'm about to show a whole bunch of stuff that I read. All right. I should say, it's tempting to say, Josh, don't compare your thing to anyone. I'm sure you've heard this advice. Don't compare your thing to slavery. It's never as bad, and comparing your thing to slavery makes you look ignorant. But is there comparison? I had to research and ask the experts. So here's some podcast guests, people who've won the Lincoln Prize, who've wrote amazing books. James Oakes, Manisha Sinha, David Blight, Adam Hochschild, John Brooks, Siddharth Kara, and listen to their episodes on my podcast to hear us talk about slavery. And now you're about to see a long list of books and works and things. There's a blog post of mine. It's just copied it in here. You can pause it and see some of the things that I've written. And there have been more since here, more. And some stuff from high school and college that I read from before that, yet more. So there's, I don't know if it's a lot or a little, but some of the stuff I've gone through. And there are a few things that made a really big impression on me. And I think they'll make a big impression on you. So in this book, Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams, who was a Trinidadian, I think he became Prime Minister of Trinidad. But this book that he wrote on slavery, he looked at the economics of slavery, and he saw that it made economic sense, financial sense for slave owners to make all the slaves of one skin color and all the owners of another. He said, a racial twist has thereby been given to what is basically an economic phenomenon. Slavery was not born of racism. Rather, racism was a consequence of slavery. I grew up thinking the Europeans looked at the Africans and thought, oh, they're like animals, and so let's put them to work like animals. I thought the racism led to slavery, but it's not. The racism wasn't there. They've been in slavery for a long time. And read the book to get the full picture. But also, more recently, Ibram Kendi wrote similarly. He said he'd been taught that racist ideas cause racist policies, but that gets the chain of events exactly wrong. Powerful economic, political, cultural self-interest has been behind policies, the behavior. People do things that were racist, and then intellectuals produce ideas to justify the policies. So first comes the behavior, then comes the belief. I mean, read his words to get it exactly how he put it. It begs the question, if racism didn't cause slavery, but slavery caused racism, what caused slavery? Because slavery didn't exist for 250,000 years of human existence. If you look at humans, most of our ancestors from, before agriculture, there was no slavery, as far as we know. So I'm going to give something that I cover a lot more in my book and a lot more depth. I'm going to cover way too briefly here. But agriculture was impossible during the this is quoting, there's a paper, an influential paper in anthropology that said agriculture was impossible during the Pleistocene, but mandatory in the Holocene. So the Pleistocene was up until about 10, 12,000 years ago. The climate changed so much, not because of human caused climate change. It just happened to be changing so much. People planted seeds and grew plants, but within a generation or so, the climate would change so much wherever you were that it wouldn't grow there anymore. So you could plant things, but you wouldn't get agriculture. In the Holocene, the climate stabilized, and a few other changes happened that it made it that all that stuff that they were planting would keep growing for a long time. And that led to food surpluses. And in certain river valleys, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River in China, and later in the New World, this food surpluses plus, all right, what a dominance hierarchy can form when there's a necessary resource that could be controlled, like food, and no alternative. So in a river valley, you can't move away. Back before this, food was all over the place, but the population didn't grow so much. Anyway, so that led to depleting resources. So there might be enough food, so the population would grow, but then you might run out of tin in the Bronze Age or wood. So cultures started living unsustainably. Now, if you're living unsustainably and you're running out of something, you got, as far as I can tell, roughly three choices. You can collapse from running out of something that you need. You can switch to living sustainably again. Or if someone else has extra, you can go take it from them. And that's imperialism. So that led to competitive strategies because now you have different cultures competing against each other. So they want to expand. And that led to imperialism, colonialism, that led to slavery. So if you take someone's stuff, that's imperialism, loosely speaking. Take their land, that's colonialism. Take their labor, that's slavery. And slavery, as we saw, led to racism. So upstream of all these things was living unsustainably. And it wasn't people chose to live unsustainably, it just happened. And that all the way downstream to racism. So from the dawn of the Holocene to slavery to today was like water flowing downhill. Just people doing what they thought was right. If we could end all racism, but continue to live unsustainably, we would recreate the conditions that cause racism. We can only end racism if we stop causing it, which means living sustainably. People often say, Josh, we got to end these problems here, these more immediate things. They're downstream. I want to end them too, and we can't end them if we keep causing them. So is racism connected to polluting and depleting? It turns out polluters and depleters already showed that they are. Illustrated by, so here's a quote from Andrew Hoffman, who's a professor of sustainable enterprise at University of Michigan. And he wrote a piece on pollution and slavery, climate change, calling all the fossil fuel abolitionists. So this is quoting him. The first time these two concepts of pollution and slavery were linked for me was 7 years ago when a senior oil industry executive in London asked me a rhetorical question. If it wasn't for oil, where would we get our energy? His answer to Andrew's astonishment was slavery. That's where we got energy from. That we, feed the slaves food and they would gather the cotton. And if you had a cotton gin that was powered by oil, that replaced slaves, but slaves are a source of energy. Polluting and depleting are not merely analogous to or like slavery. What I'm saying is that they are parts of the same dominance hierarchy, tracing its roots back to the dawn of the Holocene, and that never went away. This dominance hierarchy. And the book goes into a lot more depth, and probably my next book will too. So if you have a cotton gin powered by oil, it doesn't break. I mean, it might break, but it doesn't complain. It doesn't get sick. So the fossil fuel, and everyone thought this was just good. We replaced something that harmed people with something that didn't harm people. But the Earth's reservoirs were so big, we took centuries to fill them with pollution and deplete others of material. So people didn't notice that they were hurting others. It was delayed. But we live now when new pollution and depletion hurt people immediately, with one big difference. Some people might be uncomfortable thinking, Josh, don't compare your thing to slavery. Today's manifestation of this same dominance hierarchy causes much more suffering and death. Quoting The Lancet, the peer-reviewed British medical journal, this part that's highlighted here, pollution still causes more than 9 million deaths each year globally. This number has not changed since 2015, and it's still going, increasing. I believe increasing. 9 million per year. Here's another result from a different peer-reviewed paper in Slavery and Abolitionism and Abolition. The total cumulative slave population of the entire United States over centuries was 9 million. We every year are killing what took centuries in the United States to reach. It is much bigger today. So the political opportunity, again, going back to how to be an anti-racist, a racist is one who supports a racist policy through their actions. An anti-racist is one who supports an anti-racist policy. Well, if living unsustainably leads to remember all that downstream, racism downstream, by these definitions, polluting, depleting, and living unsustainably are racist. That's Ibram Kendi's definition. Only by living sustainably can one be anti-racist. Now, what failed to end slavery will fail to end polluting and depleting. So technology, a lot of people say technology will save us. The cotton gin, what did it do to slavery? Look at the production. The cotton gin came out in about 1790. And look at that increase in production, which parallels the increase in number of slaves. That's why the numbers went up like that. Technology augments the values of the people using it. It's not good or bad in its own. So if you think nuclear or solar, they're going to do what the cotton gin did. Legislation. When the Fugitive Slave Act, if we don't change our culture, we're going to get laws. You might get a law passed that you like, and you're also going to get laws you don't like. Judicial, the Dred Scott decision, these things didn't work, relying on technology or legislation or judicial. What worked then will work now. Recall, a nation can allow slavery or protect freedom, but not both. Likewise, it can allow polluting and depleting or protect freedom, but not both. Likewise, a nation can permit polluting and depleting, or it can be anti-racist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, abolitionist, but not both. If you permit polluting and depleting, you're racist, imperialist, colonialist, not abolitionist. So a constitutional amendment like the 13th, even an amendment reinforcing, protecting life, liberty, and property seems as unimaginable to us as the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery mostly, must have to voters then to pass, to enforce, and to live with. And yet it passed. And it's easy to enforce. I mean, slavery still exists, but a lot less than before. And I should say, in total numbers, the total number of slaves alive today is more than ever. But as a percentage of world population, it's lower. So both sides can say the other one can cite there's more than ever, but there's also fewer than ever as a percent. In any case, people then, the first mention of an amendment to the Constitution to outlaw slavery was in 1827, which I had learned from Manisha Sinha, a podcast guest. And it was roughly 38 years later that it passed. I don't think anyone anticipated when the first idea came out that it would actually pass. Maybe we can learn from history and not have to go through almost 40 years and a civil war. But people then didn't think, up until it passed, people didn't think it would pass. People didn't think they could enforce it. People didn't think they could live with it. Yet few, if any, today propose revoking the 13th. It unites us. Nearly all political groups cite it as part of their lineage. When studying Lincoln, all right, so this is me. I was learning about Lincoln and abolitionism and anti-slavery politics, and the idea of an amendment protecting life, liberty, and property by banning pollution and depletion, that popped into my head and immediately thought, that's crazy. That's not going to pass. That can't work. It's going to fail like Prohibition failed. Objection after objection in my head, like in seconds, until I thought, Josh, don't waste any time or brain power on this misguided idea. But I couldn't shake it. I researched more and more about abolitionism and anti-slavery politics and what it took to pass the 13th. And now I see it, a new amendment, as necessary because it fulfills the original intent of the founders as well as Lincoln. A lot of people look at environmental solutions as it's either big government regulating markets versus limited governments freeing markets. But what will work is big action to limit government, right? Ayn Rand, she was promoting amending the Constitution. So what will work is big action to limit government from permitting and profiting from what destroys life, liberty, and property, or violating Locke's enlightened indigenous stewardship clause, or what Jefferson said, or what Burke said, or what Kirk said, or what they all said. Just as the 13th resolved the contradiction between protecting freedom and permitting slavery, I propose an amendment to clarify the framers' original intent, what they would have written if they'd foreseen today's government gaining power and profit from depriving others of life, liberty, and property when impacted through the environment. So I envision 3 clauses. And in the tradition of how these things get written, quoting the precedent, within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, this is from the 13th, nothing may be taken from nature, quoting Locke here now, except where there's enough and as good left in common for others. So no depleting aquifers to where there's nothing left for future. For example, the Colorado River doesn't reach the ocean anymore. That's not leaving enough as good in common for others. Next, within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, so like the 13th Amendment, nothing may be taken from or put into nature when doing so destroys others' life, liberty, and property. So that's like what's in the Bill of Rights, what's in the 14th Amendment, and Congress shall have the power to enforce. One might call this anti-plunder, protecting life, liberty, and property, imperialism ending amendment, an apple pie amendment, if I take those bold letters and make an acronym. But if you'll indulge me spelling it as I pronounce it, I call it an apple pie amendment. The apple pie amendment, and by the way, my book goes into a lot more. The apple pie amendment is an amendment is the opposite of big government intervention, as even Ayn Rand attests. It limits government, but impacts big. And if you believe capitalism is the answer, it achieves what Adam Smith, Hayek, Friedman, and their peers say is necessary. And if you want to overthrow capitalism, it's the fix you're looking for, because this is more fundamental than the economic system. It will unite like the 13th. Now, my book handles the many, many objections. So I'm not going to go into them here, but read the book for more. But here are some of the objections it handles. It can't pass. The 13th only passed because of incredible circumstances like a civil war that will never repeat. If we don't pollute, others will. They'll beat us in the market and militarily. If we don't stop all polluting, it won't stop all polluting, all depleting, and all plundering. It will fail like Prohibition failed. It's too vague. Well, my book handles these things. We need time to transition. It has no precedence. States, we should go to the states first. But life requires things that pollute, like flying and disposable diapers. It will take too long to pass. My family lives flying distance away. My work requires flying. Where I live requires air conditioning and driving. That's an objection I handle. We'll return to the Stone Age. Josh, do you want us to return to the Stone Age or devolve into a Mad Max apocalypse? That's an objection the book handles. Rich nations transition from dirty to clean. We had our demographic transition. Poor nations should get to transition too. We have no right to deny it from them. That's an objection I handle. People don't want to change. Only making sustainability easier and cheaper can make them change. So that's coercion, control, and convincing. It will create a nanny state. We have to reach Mars. We have to do this. So those are some of the objections that I came up with myself. I certainly felt many of those, but now I see yeah, useful to raise the objection, but no reason to stop pursuing the amendment. The advantages of the amendment. Here's some of the many advantages. It's consistent with existing law. It achieves eco-modern and techno-optimist goals, as I'll get to in a future slide. It achieves free market, traditional, and small government goals for conservatives and libertarians. It reduces corruption. It achieves anti-racist and anti-imperialist goals for those on the left. It promotes freedom, equality, and democracy for, I hope, all of us. Enforcement is easy. It's not like prohibition where anyone can make, liquor in their bathtub. It's, if someone wants to build a platform to get oil out of the ocean, or, the beneath the ocean, it takes hundreds of $millions and the better part of a decade. Like, we know where they're going to be. If someone's going to blow up a mountaintop to get the coal, there's seismic signals that go for hundreds of miles. So enforcement's easy. It increases national security. It promotes health, family, and longevity. It unites across political divides, and it uniquely addresses the problem directly. All these other proposed solutions are like roundabout ways to try to stop polluting and depleting, but this just says don't pollute and deplete. And going back to the conservative libertarian view, it liberates the free market to solve the problems that happen when we don't pollute and deplete. It drives solutions people just pay lip service to so far. If you believe the following will work, you believe the apple pie amendment will work. So here's some things that people talk about, that if you really believe these things, you believe the apple pie amendment will work. If you believe in innovation, if you want to create a circular economy means there's no pollution or depletion. If you believe that you can substitute and find alternatives to things, that's okay. Then you believe this can work. If you believe in eco-modernism, techno-optimism, green growth, decoupling, energy transition, decarbonizing, sustainable growth, degrowth, biomimicry, all of these things are, if you promote any of these things, then you believe the apple pie amendment will work. Now, it's hard. It will take time. I'm not saying we're going to pass it overnight. I'm not saying let's go to Capitol Hill right now and start proposing it. That's why this is a business. That's why the business entrepreneurship video went first, because change will start faster there. That'll start changing, like as entrepreneurs go out and bring the joyful change that brings gratitude, that people start widespread acting more sustainably and liking it and helping others do so. That'll make then the political opportunity starts falling into place. So the workshop shows the path to the business and entrepreneurship opportunities. It creates joy, reward, and gratitude each steps. It shows that the cure is better than the disease. But we're corrupted by being at the top of this dominance hierarchy. We like the perks. Remember Bastiat? We like those perks. We feel entitled, even when we know they deprive others of life, liberty, and property. And that's why even after the business stuff starts clicking and people start realizing there is something here, people like living without polluting so much, without depleting so much, then the political opportunity kicks in to refine and extend the legacy of the nation's founders and Lincoln, creating a legacy for those who implement it, to implement the deepest values of free market, limited government libertarians, to implement the deepest values of traditional family value, American exceptionalism, national security conservatives, to implement the deepest values of abolitionist, anti-racist, and anti-imperialist liberals and radicals. If you want to serve your nation and the world, to create a legacy to last centuries, to millennia, to implement what Enlightenment leaders, our founding fathers, and the indigenous peoples they learned from intended. If you want young people to vote for you, if you want your nation to lead the world, if you want your nation and its people to be safe, healthy, and secure, if you want a brighter future, if you want to lower corruption, to unleash entrepreneurship, to finally stop causing racism. How many times I've heard people say this nation has to have a conversation about racism. We talk about it a lot, but we keep causing it. We don't realize the connection, but living unsustainably causes it. If you want to stop imperialism and colonialism, if you want a government that protects life, liberty, and property so that we can see a brighter future, then you want the apple pie amendment. Hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine today for us as it would have been someone in 1827 to envision that a mere 38 years later, the 13th Amendment would pass. But it did, and this can. And we can learn from history. As much as we want to protect our perks, like takeout, like flying and fast fashion, we can learn from history. Even plantation owners, the people enjoying the perks the most, if they could see the future, I know that they would prefer freedom and liberty for all, even if that meant them losing their perks. And we would too, if we could see a future with more freedom and liberty for all, then we would prefer that we wouldn't want to come back to today. And we have a big advantage over them, that their future is our history. We see a world without slavery, and it didn't end civilization. We know their holding onto their perks resulted into a brutal civil war over resources. Everybody suffered from it, and we can avoid such an outcome. Eventual liberty and freedom led to a brighter future. No one wants to, I'm sure there are people who want slavery back, and there are people who practice slavery, but no one's running for office saying, let's restore slavery. Now, some people are thinking, what about the GDP? All right, so let's recall from the business opportunity video. I'm just going to go quick through these slides because I talked about it in the last video. But, people thought, wait, industries are going to close. Actually, several industries went up, and some that closed, we want closed. We never want them back. We don't want overseers to come back. Now, handling those laid off requires reconstruction, and we can learn from history that we can reconstruct the new economy much more effectively than American reconstruction, as we did with Germany and Japan. Some things are going to go away. We're not going to have plastics like we did before. We're not going to have cruise ships. We're not going to have illicit fentanyl and meth. We're also not going to lose antibiotics, anesthesia, vaccines, all these other things. And we're not going to die at 30. Cities aren't going to crumble. These things were existed for thousands of years. And humans lived into their 70s. Nothing necessary for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness requires polluting or depleting, as we know, because life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were guaranteed in 1776, and that's when the steam engine just came about. So there wasn't pollution and depletion by that point. I mean, there was, but not on the scale that we have today. In serving markets, so do we need GDP growth? Is it a problem if GDP goes down? If we've overproduced and some people are without jobs, is that a big problem? Is growth necessary? Now, I'm not promoting government coercion, unless you call ending slavery coercion. It's free. To me, that's freedom and liberty. So some economists talk about growth. Milton Friedman, he said, we don't need growth. We desire it. But if people don't want it, if people realize that they can live better lives without it, that's fine with him. He wants people to be free to pursue their objective. Again, I'm not promoting coercive regulation. I don't think that freeing slaves or preventing people from taking people's life, liberty, and property and enslaving them, I don't think that to me is extending freedom and liberty. And if we stop allowing people someone to destroy your life, liberty, and property by polluting and depleting, I think that's more freedom and liberty. And if you think, oh, we need energy, we need all these things, they have a conflict with Adam Smith and the Founding Fathers, with Milton Friedman, with Friedrich Hayek and their peers. Can it pass? That's a big question. That's a big challenge because we like our perks. In the movie Lincoln, they dramatized that no one knew. If you remember, there's the big House vote. So the House, ratification by the states, but the House vote was a big vote. No one knew if it would pass that morning before it passed. Even Lincoln couldn't predict that nearly all political groups today claim abolitionism as their heritage, including liberal, conservative, libertarian, black, white, rich, poor. Imagine you lived in 1855. Millions were suffering enslavement. There was a war predicted. Culture permitted and promoted the destruction of life, liberty, and property. Imagine you knew the most divisive moment in U.S. history, abolitionism, of then legal slavery, would unify us. No one could imagine that when they're saying that democracy requires slavery. Imagine if in 1855, you had a tested leadership technique based on intrinsic motivation, not coercion, that could lead national cultural change, like I believe the Spodek method can. You could help people at the top of dominance hierarchies see themselves with the clarity we see them today as tyrants, including slaveholders and plantation owners, those who, not just the slaveholders, those who bought slave-produced goods, and those who profited from the markets. So people buying the cotton, people buying the sugar. You'd understand statements like the following were signs that even those at the top of a dominance hierarchy would prefer freedom and liberty to the perks of tyranny. So here are quotes from actual slave owners. Always I felt the moral guilt of it. How impossible it must be for an owner of slaves to win his way to heaven. My soul hath felt the awful weight of sin, so as to despair and agony, so as to desire that I had never been born, had never had being, to suffer under the burden of my guilt. People felt guilt about owning slaves. And Southerners read in their Bibles, do unto all men as you would have them do unto you. And this golden rule and slavery are hard to reconcile. People were internally conflicted, kind of like us today. A Northerner who went south saying he had every prejudice I could against slavery, tried to resist enslaving people, but then he found he couldn't help it because of the culture around him. It is lawful for me to have servants, but I hired, and therefore I've purchased, meaning not hired, but owned slaves. I cannot do as I would, I do as I can. This guy who was against slavery couldn't help. Culture drives a lot. It's very difficult to resist culture, like us today. Slavery is said to be an evil, but is no evil. On the contrary, I believe it is the greatest of all blessings which a kind providence has bestowed upon our glorious region. This is what people talk about, like fossil fuels and other sources of energy and other things that pollute and deplete. Jefferson, Madison, and Washington may not have freed their slaves, but others freed hundreds of thousands of them. Robert Carter III, who I write about in my book, he was a friend of theirs, and he freed all of his slaves, over 500. His neighbors are angry with him, but he didn't regret it. We can do something similar today. Those at the top of a dominance hierarchy might not expect it, but after you lead them to adopt life, liberty, and property, they would thank you. So if you could do something, if you had a technique that would lead people, even at the top of the hierarchy, to say, no, I prefer freedom and liberty for everyone, even if it means I lose my perks, they're going to thank you. They're not going to want to go back. They're going to wish they'd changed it earlier, as I feel and as people who've taken my workshop feel. And they're going to want others to lead. They're going to want to lead others through that change too. So if you knew how to implement that leadership technique that would accelerate abolitionism and possibly avert the Civil War, wouldn't you start doing it and make a name for yourself? That's the opportunity here. That's the political opportunity to do what abolitionists and anti-slavery politicians did. Now, from hands-on practical experience, I know you can tell people until you're blue in the face that they'll prefer liberty and freedom to the perks of being at the top of a dominance hierarchy, but they have to feel it. And that's why the workshop is experiential. You will see and feel a path to integrity, credibility, and global, for yourself. That's the only way you can lead. I mean, they're necessary for leadership and global cultural change. You're going to feel it. You're going to see, oh, I like this life. And it's not just because of me. We all prefer freedom and liberty. And you can restore liberation and freedom today by helping end pollution and depletion. That's the opportunity to do what, and to do what abolitionists and anti-slavery politicians did, to do what the conservatives are promoting, ending domination. That's why this workshop, it brings liberation and freedom for yourself, also time, money, community, all these other values. And the path leads to what abolitionists couldn't dream of, but we can learn from experience. What to do here and now. First, you don't have to change the world by yourself. You don't have to become today's Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass or Lincoln, the ones who really did a lot. I mean, Tubman went back into slave territory. But you will know that you will help them emerge. So maybe you will choose to run for office. Maybe you'll choose to, do the equivalent of going back into slave territory and liberating people. Maybe you'll choose to do that. I hope you do. But if you don't, you'll make it possible for others. So the potential legacies for political leaders and is beyond. So let me bring up some political people in the past that you can be like them. I talked about Mandela as a businessman. He was also a political person. Gandhi, a political person. Lincoln, a political person. The founding fathers, all political leaders. And you can be the next in line at that level. That's the opportunity here. How? Step one, read Sustainability Simplified. See how our culture got stuck? You heard me say this before, but this is the blueprint of how to get out of it. Take the workshop, start your mindset shift and continual improvement. So you start feeling like this is, I can see the solution, and join the community so that we bring the world with us with joy and gratitude. So you see this path to a joyful, sustainable world. So the book gives you the big picture, shows you how, and I compare it with other books from people who have not had hands-on practical experience of trying to live sustainably. They're just telling people to do what they're not doing themselves. Take the workshop. That gives you hands-on practical experience. There's nothing like playing the scales to reach Carnegie Hall. You got to practice, practice, practice. And then join the community so you're not feeling you're swimming downstream, and help grow this community. Again, hands-on practical experience is what gives us hope. And I don't have to say, buy now. It's going to cost more later, because I know that the headlines are going to increase for the rest of your life. You're going to hear about more and more climate anxiety, and you know that there's a solution. It takes time and energy and effort, but it's rewarding. I'm not making it quick or easy, but it's meaningful, rewarding, and effective. And that's why people say, this is what I've been looking for my entire life. The next videos, the celebrity opportunities. We talked about business, political. Now people want role models. That's what the next video is. And then tying it all together for our brighter future.